The world watched in disbelief as Russia launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. This wasn't just about two neighboring countries, it was a move that threatened the entire international order. The conflict stemmed from complex historical ties and geopolitical tensions that had been simmering for years. At the heart of the conflict was Ukraine's desire to chart its own course, leaning towards the West and seeking closer ties with NATO and the European Union. Russia, however, viewed this as a direct threat to its own sphere of influence and security interests. The invasion marked a dark turn in Europe, with echoes of past conflicts haunting the continent. It shattered any illusion of lasting peace and triggered a humanitarian crisis as millions of Ukrainians were displaced from their homes. The world condemned Russia's actions, imposing sanctions and providing aid to Ukraine. The conflict quickly escalated into a brutal war, with devastating consequences for both sides. The impact of the Russia-Ukraine war reverberated far beyond the borders of the two countries involved. The conflict sent shockwaves through the global economy, disrupting supply chains and causing energy prices to soar. Europe, heavily reliant on Russian gas, faced an energy crisis, forcing nations to seek alternative sources and grapple with rising costs of living. The war also exacerbated an already existing food crisis, as both Russia and Ukraine are major grain exporters, and the conflict disrupted global food supplies. The invasion also had profound geopolitical implications. It led to a strengthening of NATO, with countries like Finland and Sweden abandoning their long-standing neutrality to join the alliance. The conflict also intensified existing rivalries and fueled a new era of global uncertainty and instability, raising questions about the future of the international order. Amidst the devastation and despair, a glimmer of hope emerged in March 2025. After intense diplomatic efforts and direct calls between President Trump, Russian President Putin, and Ukrainian President Zelensky, a 30-day ceasefire agreement was reached. The agreement, though limited in scope, represented a significant breakthrough in the conflict. It aimed to pause the violence, particularly attacks targeting critical energy infrastructure, which had plunged parts of Ukraine into darkness and cold. The ceasefire was seen as a crucial first step towards de-escalation and a potential pathway to a negotiated settlement. However, the truce remained incredibly fragile, with reports of violations emerging shortly after it came into effect. Recognizing the urgency of the situation and sensing an opportunity to leave his mark on history, former U.S. President Donald Trump, despite being out of office, took it upon himself to intervene in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Leveraging his past relationships with both Putin and Zelensky, Trump initiated direct communication, aiming to bridge the divide and foster dialogue. Trump's involvement, though unorthodox, injected a renewed sense of hope into the stalled peace process. His personal approach, characterized by a blend of pragmatism and a desire for deal-making, resonated with both sides, who were weary of the relentless bloodshed and eager for a path out of the quagmire. While some questioned Trump's motives and his ability to act as an impartial mediator, others lauded his willingness to engage in direct diplomacy, recognizing that even a slim chance of progress was worth pursuing in the face of such a devastating conflict. Section 5. Talking Points in Riyadh, the Path to Resolution. In a significant development, Russian and Ukrainian delegations met in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, for U.S.-mediated peace talks on March 23 to 24, 2025. These talks, facilitated by the Biden administration, aim to build upon the fragile ceasefire and explore avenues for a more lasting resolution to the conflict. Central to the discussions was the establishment of a Black Sea ceasefire. This measure, if implemented, would ensure the safe passage of grain shipments from Ukrainian ports, addressing the pressing global food crisis exacerbated by the war. Beyond the immediate concern of grain exports, the Riyadh talks sought to establish a framework for future negotiations. This included addressing complex issues such as territorial integrity, security guarantees, and the future relationship between Ukraine and Russia. Section 6. Differing demands, Ukraine, Russia, and the U.S. at the table. The Riyadh talks revealed the significant challenges in bridging the divide between the warring parties. Each side came to the table with distinct demands, reflecting their core interests and objectives in the conflict. Ukraine, having endured a brutal invasion and occupation of its territory, remained resolute in its demands for a complete withdrawal of Russian forces and the restoration of its internationally recognized borders. President Zelensky insisted on security guarantees to prevent future aggression and ensure Ukraine's long-term safety. Russia, on the other hand, sought an end to Western military aid to Ukraine, viewing it as a direct threat to its own security. Putin's government also aimed to secure recognition of its territorial claims in eastern Ukraine, where Russian-backed separatists had been fighting Ukrainian forces since 2014. The United States, acting as a mediator, pushed for a peaceful resolution that respected Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, while addressing Russia's legitimate security concerns. The U.S. delegation emphasized the need for dialogue, compromise, and a commitment to international law and norms. Section 7. Obstacles to peace. Can trust be restored? Despite the renewed push for peace, formidable obstacles stood in the way of a lasting resolution to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Deep mistrust, fueled by years of hostility and bloodshed, cast a long shadow over the negotiations. The legacy of broken promises, particularly the failed Minsk agreements of 2014 and 2015, which were intended to end the fighting in eastern Ukraine but ultimately collapsed, served as a stark reminder of the fragility of peace accords in the region. Moreover, the ongoing violence and accusations of ceasefire violations further eroded trust between the warring parties, making it even more challenging to find common ground and move towards a negotiated settlement. Section 8. America's crucial role, leading the way to a resolution. The United States, as the world's leading superpower, played a pivotal role in mediating the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Recognizing the global implications of the war and its potential to destabilize the international order, the U.S. took a proactive approach in seeking a peaceful resolution. Beyond its role as a mediator, the U.S. provided significant military and humanitarian aid to Ukraine, bolstering its ability to defend itself against Russian aggression. This unwavering support demonstrated the U.S. commitment to upholding international law and defending the principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity. Furthermore, the U.S. rallied international condemnation of Russia's actions, imposing crippling sanctions and working closely with allies and partners to isolate Moscow on the world stage. This coordinated response aimed to increase the pressure on Russia to seek a diplomatic solution and end its war of aggression. Section 9. The uncertain future. Hope for peace in a time of war. As the sun set on the Riyadh talks, the future of Ukraine hung in the balance. While the ceasefire and renewed diplomatic efforts offered a glimmer of hope, the path to lasting peace remained fraught with challenges and uncertainties. The outcome of the conflict would have profound implications, not only for Ukraine and Russia, but for the wider international community. A negotiated settlement respecting Ukraine's sovereignty and addressing legitimate security concerns could pave the way for a more stable and secure Europe. However, a failure to find a peaceful resolution risked prolonging the suffering of the Ukrainian people and further destabilizing the region, with the potential for the conflict to escalate into a wider war. The world watched with bated breath, hoping that diplomacy would prevail, and that peace, however elusive, could eventually be found amidst the ruins of war.